So, welcome back everybody. We are continuing Perek Lamed Ches, where we left off, on page 100 on the original text. And again, you can see it on the corresponding text, and as we always mention, you could always see the previous classes of this chapter and all the chapters up till now. On this very website, put on the link, you have the Tanya, or on the tanyaonline.com, which there's easier, better yet perhaps, even though again hosted by the same hosts, better yet on the tanyaonline.com, simply for the reason that you could follow easily with the text, the class with the text, and as well the very easy access to the previous classes with the text. So I noticed in the previous class it was cut off a bit, but not much. If you follow the previous class, you could have naturally understand the overall message, because again it was just very bit towards the end which was cut off, maybe a minute or two, even though I try to usually culminate the message. But let's try to pick up from where we were holding. So the Alter Rebbe basically is saying, explaining this, which the Chazal tell us, and as they place the great emphasis on kavanah of every mitzvah, to say to the kavanah, the intent, the intention, the proper intent when one does a mitzvah, or praise, actually the lashon for that matter, which the Alter Rebbe quotes, to be even more careful here, is tefillah or shah bracha, b'lei kavanah and kiguf b'lei neshama, the importance of praying or making every bracha with appropriate kavanah, to the extent that if you do it without a kavanah, it's like a body without a soul. So now this is coming in continuation of the very opposite message in the very beginning of the chapter, where the Alter Rebbe points out that the significant majority of brachas and the significant majority of tefillah and even Kriyas Shema, it's namely about uttering the words. It's just very few parts of the entire prayer, Shema. It's the first pasuk, which is a minority in comparison to the entire Shema, significant minority, and so too when it comes to brachas, it is, in other words, the very bit of it that it has to be repeated if you didn't say with kavanah, which means the significant majority of prayer, Shema or brachas, it's about uttering the words. It's about saying Baruch Atah and Shema Yisrael and so on. As the Alter Rebbe pointed out, apparently when you're dealing with such a mitzvah, which is all about kavanah, which is all about a mind, a heart, and a soul, and so on, why is it so significant, the verbalization of these words? And Alter Rebbe again, as a follow-up to the previous chapters, Lamed Vav, Lamed Zayin, which explains that the ultimate purpose of creation is about making a dira le'yizbarach b'tachteinim, a dwelling place for HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'tachteinim, in a very inferior world. As the point is, to be an inferior world, the neshama invested, not divested of body and animal soul, but invested in body, in animal soul, taking them and transforming them, the tachtein, even sheba adam, and making that they, bringing the light, the kedusha, likis, the godly sanctity, into the nefesh habahamis, in the animal soul, into the body, transforming them. They become a conduit. They become to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They become to the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They become a dira, a dwelling place for Hashem. So that's why it's important that we utter the words that in this context of brachas and tefillah, even though one would perhaps argue and say it's all about kavanah. No, it's important to utter the words literally. As the Gemara says, akimas fasav have a maisa, it's a miniature action when one moves his lips, and generally it's an exertion of the body when one verbalizes anything. In other words, when one has to formulate words and letters and so on, it's an expression of it's a bodily expression, and that's the point, to bring the kedusha into the body, into the nefesh habahamis, and so on. So yet, again, right after those two dots, Alter Rebbe says, nonetheless, even though that's the overall message over here, nonetheless, I want to tell you that that it is important, kavanah. Even though, again, the overall message, with a significant majority of this very chapter, Lamed Ches, deals with the that it is the importance, the great importance of praying and doing a bracha with kavanah per se. So it's really together, not to substitute the kavanah with the actual mitzvah, because the main thing is to say the bracha, to verbalize the prayer, to verbalize the Kriya Shema, the Shema, but nonetheless, it is if you don't do it with kavanah, it's like body and soul. In other words, it should be done together. We shouldn't just take the message that because the most important of it is to verbalize these words, and therefore perhaps relegate the notion of kavanah. No, kavanah is extremely important to the extent that the Chazal tell us that tefillah, a bracha, b'lei kavanah is like body without soul. And a body without soul seems to be lifeless, seems to be, or namely in comparison to the liveliness which exists in the neshama. Need not explain. The neshama is all about life. It gives life. It projects life. It vitalizes. It makes something else live. That's what neshama. It comes into a body. It makes the body alive. So neshama is all about life as opposed to guf. And it's important to live with Torah mitzvahs. A lebedike Torah, and a lebedike daven, and a lebedike bracha, and a lively Kriya Shema. So it's important to have the kavanah. It's important to have the neshama. So this was again the introduction into the last week's class, which the Alter Rebbe points out that when he starts deciphering and dissecting this statement in Guf B'lei Neshama, and he says, let's analyze what the Gufin was the Neshama. Because what do we know about Guf and Neshama? We know what we see over here in this world. We know the way it's in this world. We know something which is, we know that there's a Guf and there's a Neshama. So if we take the Guf and Neshama the way we understand it, the way we perceive it, we can appreciate Guf and Neshama. And so on the surface, certainly that Neshama is all about Chayim, Chayis, and as opposed to the Guf, it seems to be lame, lifeless. But the Alter Rebbe starts clarifying, and as he dissects this Maimer Azal, and he says, not necessarily on the surface, it seems to be so, but since when this guf done lifeless, we know that everything has enormous chayus, everything has enormous energy, even a stone has enormous stone, which is between the daim and tzmei chai medaber. It is, again, just briefly catching up to this, which we're supposed to continue today. The daim, which is the lowest within the inanimate, which is within the four level, the four dimension, four elements which exist in this world, which would be the stone, which would be an obvious daimim, inanimate, the way it was created in the 6 days of creation. That's the way it is. It doesn't grow. It stays in one place because it is inanimate. Means to say it's not something which has the ability to grow mikatnas legadlus. And nonetheless, we know that there's a lot of energy in that stone. Again, as we elaborated last week on this point, that every single thing which exists within creation, it's not Hashem just created years ago and just there. It's not just something that's just there. Hashem revitalizes creation not only every day, every moment, like the Alter Rebbe adds in later to B'chol Rega V'Rega, which means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would not pump energy into that stone at this very moment. At this very moment. If you look at the stone, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is at that moment pumping in energy into the stone, and if he'd stop doing that, the stone wouldn't just break apart, look different, it would just simply cease to exist. It would literally disappear. So the fact that the stone is there, there's a lot of energy in the stone. There's energy in the stone. And what kind of energy? It's a godly energy. And a godly energy is all about life. You got Hashem Elikim Chayim, Elikim Emes, Hashem Elikim Emes, Hashem Elikim Chayim, namely. And that Hashem is all about life, so Hashem's energy is in that stone, so it's a lot of lively even energy, a lot of life associated with the Elikim Chaim, which is again absolute life. So when we contrast Guf and Neshama, so in Neshama perhaps you can see a bit more life, but is there no Chaim in something which is just a Guf? And then we take it to the actual Guf of a balchai, of an animal, of guf of adam. There's not only there's not only a energy which is vitalizing the guf, even without the neshama making the guf function, eat, drink, and so on. But the guf is a very sophisticated entity. It's a sophisticated creation. And therefore the guf itself has multiple channels of life which make it exist and make it look and appear and ultimately ready to receive the Eira Neshama. If it's the eye, if it's the ear, this is an important Bria of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which the Eibishter gives a lot of life, and again different types of life in order to be a keli for the Neshama to enter, in order to make it function, the eye to see and the foot to walk and so on. So how could you say that when you want to compare, if you want to aggrandize the importance, the significance of kavana, doing something with kavana, why would you compare it to a guf and to say it's just like a guf neshama? If you stop for a moment, the guf itself has so much chayis. Again, I suggest everybody to see it in the previous class if you weren't there. If you're just joining, we were a little mightich elaborated on this point, but in the end of the day, it seems that the difference is not that great, and especially that they're both part and parcel of Elam Haza, this very physical world, which we know that the physical world, again, this was where basically we ended off, that the physical world itself, it comes through there's a common denominator for that matter, in every part of the physical world, that it's part of Elam Haza Gashmi. That when HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to create this world, because it's so different and perhaps diametrically opposite than the Olam Elyon, for example, Gan Eden appears and so on, because for the fact that this is a Elam Hazah Gashmi, it's not only a world which doesn't demonstrate on the surface its creator, and it conceals its own creator. In other words, it kind of ignores its own source of energy, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mechadish b'chol massive variations of the world which is receiving its energy. It doesn't have no independent energy. A world which is receiving its constant energy from HaKadosh Baruch Hu should have non-stop demonstrate Hashem Echad and Erev Milvadeh. If it had independent energy, it could ignore the godly energy, but if there's no other energy other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so how can it, so apparently if you looked at the world, what is it? Especially when you say when HaKadosh Baruch Hu would pull back that energy, the world would come to Ayin V'Efes, the completely nothing. So it's mere existence of Hashem Echad. So the world should demonstrate Hashem Echad, but it doesn't on its own. Why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world in that very manner, that He condensed, He contracted as Eirei HaBilti Bal Gvul, as infinite light, in order to create Olam Hazeh. That's one dimension. That's one reason. So there's a hester panim, an obscurity of the pnim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, and He asked man, and that's why it becomes a tachtin. Tachtin obviously doesn't mean, when the Pashas Nasei says HaKadosh Baruch Hu did with tachtin, it doesn't mean that it's a lower floor, a higher floor, and so on. It's about a world which is emptied, seems to be devoid of its own emes, because emes Hashem le'elam, the truth of elam is Hashem. But that's the objective and goal, and that is the purpose and mandate of man, to come into this world, megala, to reveal its own emes. That's the word. Nisav HaKadosh Baruch Hu, He sent the Yid, because the title is L'dira B'Tachteinim, and He told the Yid, you go to a world, with different Meshalim, and the Medrash gives a number of places, Gemara, Medrash, Chazal, and so on, that the Eibishter sends the Yid to megala, to reveal the emes Hashem Leilam. And how does He do it? Obviously through learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, and davening and saying brachas and so on. As Dr. Rebbe so clearly and articulately, so beautifully explains this in Lam Perek Lam Vav and Lamed Zayin. But yet the world on its own, prior to Avodas Adam, it's a kind of a paradox. Something which doesn't have any independent energy should obscure the Hashem Echad. The answer is yes. That's the way the Eibishter created the world, with a hester panim, with a complete concealment of the Eibishter's light, complete concealment of His own Eirei HaBilti Bal Gvul, hester panim, the obscurity of the pnim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the panim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Eirei HaBilti Bal Gvul, the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And another dimension which we find in Elam Hazeh, which perhaps is synonymous, that it's Elam Hazeh Gashmi, it's a physical world. Now the quantum leap step from spirituality, the spiritual to the physical, is very grand. It is a quantum leap step, better yet said. It is a grand step. It's something which is, there's nothing spirituality, as much as it gradually wants to evolve from one level to the other. There would never be a creation of a physical creation. That's why there are Olamis Bli Gvul, it says. Infinite amount of Olamis. But all of them are spiritual. So what makes it a lower element, an inferior element, is obvious. There's less Gilui Elokus, there's less godly revelation, and there's less godly manifestation. godly revelation of the lower world, which makes it a lower world. But there's no Eilam Hazeh Gashmi, there's no physical world in Eilam Ha'elin, for example, the Ganein HaTachton as opposed to Ganein Ha'elin. It's not like a downstairs and upstairs. It's less of Gilui Elokus, which makes it a Tachton, but still it's all Ruchniistic, and so too the four Eilam is Bri. Again, we discussed it many times. Bri, Yitzira, Atzilus, Bri, Yitzira, Asiya, even there's Asiya Ruchni, spiritual at the level of Asiya. But this world, which is unique about it, it's Eilam Hazeh Gashmi, it's physical, and therefore there's a common denominator between every part of Eilam Hazeh. The fact that it's beyond the other side of the curtains, the Hester Panim, and then Hashem creates a physical world, which obviously the physical on the surface seems to be an extra or a result of an enormous additional layer of Hester Panim, of a concealment of a Kadosh Baruch Hu's Eira Bilti Bagvul, because it was created a Davar Gashmi, physical, limited, finite, with all the parameters and all the descriptions which the physical, as opposed to the spiritual, contains, which is so diametrically opposite of when we think about a Kodesh Baruch Hu, Bligvul, infinite, limitless, and so on. Now, parenthetically said, it doesn't mean that Kodesh Baruch Hu cannot connect with Eilam Hazeh Gashmi because it's so diametrically opposite, because of apparently the way we perceive a Kodesh Baruch Hu. But this again we introduced a few times, what it says in Avedus HaKodesh, that Kishem Sheish L'Koach B'Bilti Balgvul, Yesh L'Koach Balgvul. We can't limit Hashem, I'm going to say it in brief, we can't limit Hashem to the infinity, to infinity. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is equally in the finite as he is the infinite. This is part of the believable of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's part of the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It is not limited to the infinite. And therefore, in the end of the day, that this very physical Eilam is ultimately, yes, we can reveal the emes, the etzem of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this physical world, and quite on the contrary, that's the reason, the fact that this is the reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu created everything that itself says that the core essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is dafka in Eilam Hazeh Gashmi, much more than he is in the Eilam Salyenim. Again, as we explained, and based on different prokim in the very few last chapters, Lamed Vav, Lamed Zayin, demonstrates this point very clearly. But in any case, when we're talking about getting back to the context over here, we're talking about the texture of Eilam Hazeh. It comes through a Hester Panim, a great concealment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light. And therefore, there is a common denominator, a very clear common denominator between Eilam Hazeh, between rather every dimension of Eilam Hazeh, may it be guf, may it be neshama, may it be body, may it be soul. There's a common denominator. In other words, when we want to contrast to, for example, guf and neshama, which on the surface seem to be, one seems to be full of life and one seems to be lifeless, we take a step, and therefore the Chazal wanted to compare the prayer, or brachas, or kriyashma without kavanah, in comparison to the prayer, kriyashma and brachas with kavanah, kiguf b'lei neshama, if you do it without kavanah, without the proper intention. It seems on the surface that would be a very accurate example, or an accurate similarity, but however, if you look a bit deeper, you say, wait, both the guf and the neshama are both productions of Hashem's Hester Panim, because they're both part of Eilam Hazeh, this very physical world, and as such, they both come as a result, consequent to the great tzimtzum, the greatest of all tzimtzumim, or the many, many, multiple, infinite amount of tzimtzumim, concealments, and contractions of it, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Eira Bilti Balgvul. In one word, they're both results of the Hester Panim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the obscurity, the cover-up of the Pnim, of the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So, why is it so opposite? Why would we use the term guf and neshama or guf and neshama when we want to point out the significance of prayer and kriyashma brachas with kavanah, as opposed to without kavanah? So Alter Rebbe answers again. We'll say that if this very last, towards the end of the last class, we pointed this out much stronger, again in a bit more of elaboration. But with this we can follow. The Alter Rebbe basically answers and says, in the end of the day, the reason why that ended up being guf and that ended up being neshama is because the tzimtzum wasn't that so intense, even though they both have in common that they're both part of Elam Hazeh, this very physical world, which comes as a result of the Hester Panim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So there is a common denominator. But why did this turn out to be a neshama? And why did this turn out to be guf? Why did this ultimately, they're both vital, both receiving their vitalization, their energy from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Even via the curtain, this Hester Panim, or the many tzimtzumim, which ultimately produced this very physical world, Elam Hazeh Agashmi. Why did one end up being a guf, which on the surface seems to be lifeless, even though, as we mentioned, there's a lot of life in every single part of Elam Hazeh? And why did this end up being a neshama, which has so much chayis, so much energy, that it doesn't only live in its own, but it has the ability to bring function to an entire body, if it's the body of the animal, with the multiple different animals, with their characters, natures, and so on. If it's the lion with its might and all the other animals in their particular style, the way they express themselves, they have so much chayas to make them walk, jump, and run, and so on. And again, when it comes to man, even more so, the neshama has the ability to give the person to see and to hear and to think, to intellectualize, and so on and so forth, to speak. So why did this end up being such a precious or such a entity so full of life that it's able to give off and to radiate and to bring so much function into a guf, into a body with all its sophistication? Is the reason for that is because in the end of the day, that itself rather tells you, better yet, that itself tells you that there is a bit of less tzimtzum, there's a bit of less concealment over this, this which ultimately produces neshama, as opposed to this which produces guf, as opposed to this which produces body. The fact that this ended up like a body, which on the surface, as you look at the body, it seems to be lifeless. Naturally, we're talking about a body separate from soul. A person sleeps, or after 120, it's completely lifeless. Or when you look at the domain, the inanimate, it doesn't have any life. It's just a lame stone. And even though, again, it's receiving so much energy, but nonetheless, the fact that it ended up being a lame stone, it ended up being the inanimate, says that there's another, that it was affected by these tzimtzumim, by these concealments, these contractions much more than other entities which do exude and express themselves with life, exude life. Even starting from the tree, the plant, it produces, it grows from, again, katnus legadus, from small to big, produces, and so on. And then, namely, when you come to the chai, bal chai, that it not only produces and not only grows, but it moves and it has multiple functions, and much more so when it comes to the medaber, the person, who the human being, which is extremely sophisticated, again, namely because of his ability to intellectualize and speak and so on. So the fact that this becomes a neshama which does all that, that itself shows that there was a bit less tzimtzum of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore the neshama, the production of the neshama, would be so very different than the production of the inanimate, of the eved, of the stone. And that's based on this. The Alter Rebbe is saying now we understand the precise expression of Chazal, which tell us which try to relate to us the significance of davening with kavana, or saying krishma with kavana, or saying a bracha with kavana, with a proper intent. They use this precise similarity or example because in the end of the day there is significantly more energy in the neshama, much more than the energy which exists in the guf, or if you want to talk about the entire Elam Hazeh, as again the compartmentalization of all four elements. There are the inanimate, then there is the botanical, the vegetation, and the world of vegetation, and the world of Bal Chai, the animal, and then the world of Medaber, which is obviously the human being, which is in a separate level, a separate element. There's no comparison to the energy which comes into the Chait and the Medaber, as opposed to the Tzemech and the and actually each one so differently, but interestingly, the Alter Rebbe basically divides, and we can naturally appreciate. There's the Baal Chai, where do we see the nefesh of the nefesh, or the Baal Chai of the nefesh of the Baal Chai, the nefesh of Medaber, and we see that commonality, we see the common denominator between them, because they not only allow something to grow and blossom, but they move and have so many multiple functions. And again, as opposed to the Tzemech and Medaber, even though they are distinct and different, one grows and one produces, as opposed to the inanimate, which does not do any of that, but yet again there's a certain similarity of those two, as again we see the Alter Rebbe complementalizes them both 2 and 2, but we could all appreciate that it's about 4 distinct and separate types of creations. And this is what the Alter Rebbe is saying, that it's not ein shava b'kol. Right on top of the cake, b'chinas is tzimtzum v'spashtus says ein shava b'kol. And the way the tzimtzum, which means this contraction of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the Eir of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is mispashit in them, in order to create them, is very distinct and very different. Truly distinct and truly different. Not only in appearance. When you talk about the physical body, as we continue, and we talk about the inanimate kavonim va'ofer, like stones and earth, the ha'ora of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this light ultimately which creates. And this energy which creates, it's not so light, it's not so bright, because if it was bright, it would, if it was bright and if it was light, meaning to say, if it would brought out the bleak vul, the infinite, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the pnim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu wouldn't end up as a stone. It wouldn't end up just like a goof. It wouldn't have been physical as well. It would just be completely consumed, be part of the infinite experience of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the ha'ora, to be exact in this context, the ha'ora, which means the energy which comes and creates the avonim and the offer, the inanimate like stone or earth, is b'chinas tzimtzum gadol, is a greater contraction. Asher ein kamayu. There's nothing like it. Nothing of its sort. It tzimtzum, there's no there's nothing of the sort. Tzimtzum in all of the different tzimtzumim, which again the concealments, the contractions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and similar to the ultimate contraction of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which creates, or this contraction of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which creates offer and avanim. Again, the mere fact that the production, the byproduct, the result, the consequence of this energy, which is investing in this part of Eilam Haza, would end up being a stone or offer or earth. That itself shows that this tzimtzum is enormous. This which again contracts and holds back, condenses, conceals the Eir of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's so minimal that it doesn't have the ability to grow and produce like a tree, a bush, and so on. The next step of Tzemeach, when it comes to Tzemeach, it's not it just appears so, but it is truly so. Meaning to say, this energy which comes and vitalizes that tree has trickles in a bit more of the bleak vul of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore it's able to grow and produce and so on. V'derech klal, nechlokis la'avra madregas, and generally it's divided and compartmentalized to 4 different levels: the daimim, the tzemech, the chai, medaber, as we know, the inanimate, the botanical world, and then the chai, which is the world of animal, and the medaber, and the human being. For that matter, it corresponds to the 4 Isis of Shem Hashem, like it's brought in Kabbalah in a number of places, many places. The reason that these four elements, because the reason for the compartmentalization of these 4 elements is because everything comes from Hashem, and we know Hashem has 4. The Shem Hashem has 4 letters: Yud Kei Vav Kei, which everything ultimately is created. Kibiko Hashem Tzuri Lamu, or Bechlal Bidvar Hashem Hashemayim Nasu. The Hashem is with Mahava V'Chayim Mekayim. This is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which creates. It comes via, or it's Hashem's name, which is the Shem of Hashem, is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the reason why there's the 4 Isis is because it's different energies which come from each one from another us. And again, the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not just like extrinsic, like it is perhaps a name of man, even though by name of man we know ultimately, especially the name of a Yid, it's very much part and parcel of the Yid's neshama, and the neshama it goes through the energy of the neshama comes is manifest via his name, but on the surface, call me Avram, call me Moshe. What's the difference? By Kodesh Baruch Hu, it's not so. The Shem Hashem, this is the name with which is part and parcel of Kodesh Baruch Hu, and the reason why it's divided into four is the way that Kodesh Baruch Hu invests in the Yud Kei Vav Kei in order to ultimately create, to be mashpia, to give off life and so on, which ultimately produces and creates. So when we find a world with the four elements, it's brought in a number of places because it corresponds to the Yud, to the K, to the Vav, and the K. The Rebbe goes on and says, now we can understand why the Chachamim use that example. Here the Alter Rebbe is starting dividing, in other words, grouping them. Deimim and Tzemech and Chai Medaber. As we said before, there are distinctions and obvious distinctions and differences, but we can appreciate why the division in this fashion, why this dividing them in this fashion, because there's a great common denominator, a greater commonality between the Daim and Tzemech than the Tzemech and Chai, and similar to the Chai Medaber than the Chai backwards to Chai and Tzemech, because in the end of the day the Tzemech doesn't budge, it doesn't move from its original place, and so on and so forth, that we could all appreciate, as opposed to the Chai Medaber. Obviously we see the common denominator between them, again, even though they're very distinct. So here he says, just like there we can understand there's no comparison to the light and force which enters in Daim and Tzemech, as opposed to in comparison to the light and force and energy which is invested in the Chai Medaber, which is again the animal and the human being. Even though that there is that overall commonality between all creatures of Elam Hazeh, all, as we said before, the entire Elam Hazeh comes through that famous levush, that famous layer, curtain, garment, cover-up, which is called Noga. As we spoke about it many times, the energy which ultimately produces and creates this Elam Hazeh Agashmi, every part of Elam Hazeh Agashmi, even the Chai, even the Medaber, the sophisticated Medaber, is all as a result productions of consequences of this great levush, the overall levush, which is called levush nega. And I say great levush, meaning say very thick levush, which is called nega, which produces a physical world with every single detail and element within this physical world. So that is obviously, again, the common denominator between them. That it's part, again, as a result of the levush nega. And again, we explained last week, this nega, which is the klipas nega, which we explained last week, and then when we learned of Perek Lamed Zayin, it's all based on the Perek Vav and Zayin, which again you could easily look up on the TanyaOnline.com website with the text and the explanation and so on. This is that thick levush which ultimately allows the spiritual to ultimately, or the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which still is prior to crossing the levush nega, remains spiritual, but when it crosses the levush nega, the other side becomes looking very different. It's Elam Hazeh, it's a physical world with all its limitations and expressions of finitude and so on, which again includes every part of creation, including the Chai and Medaber. But nonetheless, we could all appreciate that there's a certain light which trickles into the Chai and the Medaber, namely Medaber and even the Chai, as opposed to the Tzemech and the Daimon, the inanimate, or even the Tzemech. Now as such, and it's just like we can appreciate that, then in the end of the day there's a bit the difference as the light which manifests in the Medaber and Tzemech is different than the Daimon and the Chai. Kechein erech v'dimin klal ben ha'oros v'hamshachas ein tzov baruch hu shopnim yisrit tzeinis baruch hu b'li hester ponim u'levush klal ami'iru melubeshes b'mitzvos ma'asis mamosh v'chein b'mitzvos atluis b'dibur u'bituis v'sayim b'li kavana shu nechshav k'maisem mamish kinal l'gabe ha'oros v'hamshachas ein tzov baruch hu hami'iru melubeshes b'kavonis ha'mitzvos ma'asis Adam miskaven basiyosen kidei l'dofko ba yizborach alekim retzaynei shehu retzaynei echad v'chein bekavanos hatfila v'kriyesh membrichaseo v'shar brachas shebekavanosi bohen nedabek machshavte v'sichle ba yizborach. Now that was a long stretch of text. So before I'm going to actually try to translate this text over here, but then namely culminate the message, and we'll stop over here because this is the culmination of this very, very message. As we can appreciate, as much as we can appreciate the difference of the energy which comes and creates and produces the Chayim Medaber in comparison to the Daimim and Semeach, what Alter Rebbe is basically going to say is that the same way we could appreciate the difference of someone serving a Kodesh Baruch Hu without Kavanah as opposed to someone serving a Kodesh Baruch Hu with Kavanah. It's a different type of energy, it's a different relationship, it's a different type of connection. But let's try to just, I'm just going to go through the wording just to touch the words. And again, if you have, especially when you're looking into your English text, it's easy to follow, but let's try to, but if you're not, and especially if you don't have the text in front of you, I'm going to, just because it was again a long stretch, let me just try to translate it verbatim, and then we're going to culminate with a message. So he says, Kach, so too, there's no similarity be as in comparison between the energy of the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the essence of the pnim, which means the inwardness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's desire, without any cover-up, without any garment, which shines and invests in mitzvahs, maisius, which means mitzvahs which are merely done with action, and so too in mitzvahs which are dependent and associated with speech and movement of the lips, yet without kavanah, which as we know is also considered maisa, akivas svasav have a maisa, moving the lips is considered an action, all in comparison to the great light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which shines and invested in the intent of the mitzvahs maisius, that the person is mitkaven, which means he has the intention via these actualizing, via doing the mitzvahs in order to cleave to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, via fulfilling rather Hashem's desire, which Hashem's desire and his desire is one. Doing a mitzvah is virtually connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and so in the intention which he invests in davening and in Krishma and in its brachas and any other brachas, that with his kavanah, with his intent, he cleaves, he connects his thoughts and his intellect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the end of the text over here. So the Alter Rebbe is basically saying that, and it's interesting, the expression as we start this last wave, so to say, it seems like the Alter Rebbe is alluding to the kavanah, because he uses the lashon over here, the amshach of ein sof, pnimis itzayni, beli hester panim, without any concealment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's face. But again, he ends up with the word mitzvahs maisis, and so mitzvahs atluis b'dibur. Then he starts contrasting ligabei, because the answer is, and make no mistake, that if any mitzvah which one does, even without kavanah, he touches the core essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As the Alter Rebbe elaborated up till now in a number of prakim, namely in Lamed Hey, Lamed Vov, Lamed Zayin, that this, when we say a mitzvah being ratzon HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not like the way it is by a person, that there is me and there is something I desire, and it's not necessarily my desire is really associated with the core essence of myself. The desire could come, the desire can go. It's an extrinsic desire, even something that I want very much. By a person there's hu and there's ritzeinei. When it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as we know, there is the expression hu v'chochmasa yiritzeinei echad. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, his wisdom and his desire is essentially one. Meaning to say, when you open a Gemara and you see the Chachma of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that is the Eibishter. When you put on tefillin without kavanah, that is beli hester panim. That's the pnim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because that is the Eibishter. Because what is it? What is the point of putting on tefillin? It's ritzeinei. It's the Eibishter's ratzon. And hu ritzeinei echad. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ratzon is essentially one. So the mitzvah is Hashem. Beli hester panim. Even without doing it without kavanah, we use the term beli hester panim. There's no concealment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's pnim, because a mitzvah is Hashem. Kabdus ha-mitzvahs. Because the mitzvah is mitzvah sai. It's Hashem. It's Hashem's mitzvah. And again, It's not just like it's Ratzon Hashem. Hu Ritzoni Echad. This is God Himself. Every mitzvah. Eating matzah and Pesach without kavanah. This is the etzem of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Learning the Chachma of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is naturally Torah. This is Hashem Himself. Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I put myself. Hashem says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. The Gemara says, Anochi is an acronym. Ano nafshi ksavas yavos. Hashem says, I know myself, me. Nafshi, my soul, the core essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ksavis, I wrote it into Torah Yahavas and I gave it over to you. Learn Torah, this is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You do a mitzvah, this is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. B'li Esther Pani. And that's why the Lashon over here, klal, b'li Esther Manim Levush klal. Because this is Pnimis Ritzeinu HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Not all Ritzeinis of HaKadosh Baruch Hu are Pnimis Ritzeinu HaKadosh Baruch Hu. For example, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. Did He want to create a world? Sure, He wanted to create a world. For whatever reason He wanted to create a world. So someone say, you know what? There's also Ratzon Hashem. Let me invest in Hashem's world. Hu Ritzoni Echad. Hashem and His Ratzon is one. So let me invest in Eilam Hazeh. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu created. How do you create? No one compels HaKadosh Baruch Hu to create. The only reason He creates is because He wants to create. So it becomes Ratzon Hashem. Let me invest in more. We have to do mitzvahs chas v'shalom. Chas v'chalila. Because the creation of the world is chitzenis Ritzoni. The external dimension of Hashem's Ratzon. So it's not part and parcel of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Well, if you use it for a purpose and you bring the kedusha of the Eidol Liki rather within creation, obviously then the world itself becomes part of Pnimis. And that's the purpose for that matter. That doesn't only stay in the world of mitzvahs, it penetrates into the Eilam Hazeh, and better yet said, that's the reason why mitzvahs, when you give a significant majority of mitzvahs, deal with the physical world, because the point is to transform the physical world into an abode for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Asora Kab B'Shekel HaKadosh, to connect the Aseres HaDibreis, which is Pnimis Ritzeinu HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the part which is Hashem Himself, with Asora Mamoris, which is the inferior of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Ratzon. And again, as we mentioned, the point Yichud Kutchabrichu Shchinte, the Dagya of Kutchabrichu, the way to this transcendent, holy, separated, which is Aseres HaDibreis, Asora Kab B'Shekel HaKadosh, to connect it, to fuse it, to perfectly fuse it, synthesize it with the Asora Mamoris, which is the Ritzeinu Chitzeinu of Ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So obviously, if you do it with a purpose and you do your avodah, obviously you're touching upon this chitzenis haratzon, the production of the world, because the point is again to make a HaKadosh Baruch Hu indir b'tachtenim. Yet chas v'shalom, to separate the two and say this is haratzon, that's ritzein chalila v'chas chas v'shalom, because that's chitzenis haratzon. It's not part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Quite on the contrary, if it's devoid of purpose, divine purpose, it becomes something that HaKadosh Baruch Hu despises. Chas v'shalom, especially when it goes into the world of avodah and so on, violation, sin. Again, different, more of a distant step in the devoid of any purpose, godly purpose, and so on, which is again the world of sin and so on. But the mitzvah itself, that's the pnimis of Hashem's Ratzon, and that's what we say that is Hashem. So if you do a mitzvah without anything, this is the same lush. He uses the same expression, which shines in every single mitzvah. And if you say a bracha without kavanah, you're connecting to the pnimis of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yet, and again, that's the same word when you go to the example. They're both part of Eilam Hazeh. But again, that's in a negative manner. They're both part of the production of Eilam Hazeh, which comes as a result of the Lavush Noga. So it's a negative. Again, it's negative, but let's not mix the mashal and the nimshal, the parable and the nimshal over here, the message. They're just trying to say there is the common denominator there and the common denominator over here, but obviously you cannot compare. They're both productions of Eilam Hazeh, but could you compare Neshama and Guf? Could you compare the Daimon Tzemech as opposed to the Chai Medaber, a lion, for example? The energy which exists in a chai, any type of chai for that matter, and especially when it comes to the sophisticated medaber, is there any comparison? And that's what he says. True. When you do any mitzvah, and you do without kavanah, you're connecting to the pnimis ritzeinu of HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'li ester panim, without any concealment at all, without any lavush. Yet there's no comparison to the way you do it, with kavanah, with intent, with passion. With the objective to cleave to HaKadosh Baruch Hu via fulfilling Hashem's mitzvah, via fulfilling Hashem's ratzon. And how much more so when it comes to kavanas atfilah. Instead of being lip service, you understand the meaning, the intent of the davening, and you say Krishma, and you revolutionize the message of Hashem Echad within your system, and you live and you lead Krishma different the way you entered the Kriya Shema, as opposed to just saying Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And the same thing when it comes to Birichas Krishma, which is again in Shachris and in Ma'ariv, in the Arvit, the build-up to Krishma, the follow-up of Krishma, Emes, Ve'emunah, Kol Zeis, Ve'kayim Aleinu, and so on, Ve'emes, Ve'yatzif, Til Gal Yisrael. When you daven with a kavanah of these important brachas, and so meaningful, and the message with the brachas, and the message with the brachas ought to convey to us, again, to the davener, as Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. It's about internalizing. You, Yid, internalize this reality of the oneness of Hashem. And so too when you make any bracha, you take a candy or you take a cookie, you make a bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, Be'er Minim Mezeinis, and you just say it. Obviously, when you make the bracha, you're connected to a Kodesh Baruch Hu, because there's a mitzvah. This is a Seres HaDibros, what a Kodesh Baruch Hu invested. And there's a Neichi, his Nafshi, true, B'li Ester Panim. But could you compare that to when you say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam? The kavanah that Baruch, which also not only is blessed, but also Baruch is, like Mishnah says, a mavrich hasagef, and you're drawing the Atah, and it becomes Hashem, it becomes Elokeinu, Kechenu v'chayuseinu, our energy, our source, our energy, our life force. And this energy is not only Elokeinu to the Yid, but Melech HaOlam. It extends itself to the entire world. The world senses the Hashem Echad. And this whole experience is just by making that bracha, because the whole message is indeed in that bracha. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam. And not only Bara Minim Mezeinis, but Beire Minim Mezeinis. He's actually right now creating this Minim Mezeinis. That's why it says in present tense, not in past tense. There's enormous energy. And you become part of this whole experience, a part of the message. Is there any comparison? Obviously not. Comparison to the medaber, to the stone, sophisticated human being to the lame stone. There is no comparison. Have a wonderful evening.